Hey everyone. So a few weeks ago we covered Jarl. This was initially when the hero was announced, and the point of the deck tech was to cover basically what an Ice Earth Guardian would look like with its reintroduction into Classic Constructed. The list was built only off of the revealed cards. We were obviously missing a lot of pieces, but the idea was to construct as much of the deck as possible, and then with the new spoilers to chip away at the old list, replace things, and then figure out what our final deck would kind of look like. So this is what we came up with for the video, right? We're mainly leaning into Ice, mainly because Earth, while having decomposed payoffs, is a little bit too hard to decompose reliably without a heavy Earth build. And so this was mainly a clone of previous Oldham lists, specifically during his final run in the meta. You're playing just good stuff deck, right? You're playing Tunic for CNC pummels. You can pummel Spinal if you want. You're stacking Oakenold for second cycle and then just naturally fusing it either with your Sotomaros or your Pulses that you're pitching. You have some decent late game finishers with Glacial, Macho. You have Rouse, which you can either pitch stack or play in the first cycle. And it was really just standard Oldham, and your sideboard leaned a little bit more into the Ice cards. The only thing we kind of deviated with the deck was things like Red Arctic, since I was also given additional Frostbite, putting up to 4 Frostbites for 1 card, and then obviously wanting to run Mangle to get its effect. So that was the list. It felt pretty good for what it was, right? But then we got some more spoilers. So we got specifically over here at Polygon, we got the pretty much like the rest of the cards as far as I'm aware. Let's go one by one about what these would change in the deck, right? So we have the Gauntlets of Boreal Domain. These just say that you have to play Mangle. So originally in this list, I did talk about the fact that I didn't even really want to play Mangle in this deck. It felt like the worst card most of the time. And these unfortunately just said that we have to play it pretty much, which is perfectly fine. The other thing this card did too, though, was kind of incentivize you to play a little bit more Earth, right? Because giving it Dominate is kind of okay, but the fact that you're also playing, Crumble to Eternity, pretty likely you're going to be able to dominate Mangle pretty often. So the +2 here is actually pretty good. So it kind of got me thinking that maybe we need to lean a little bit more into Earth. Really specifically, this being an Earth Ice equipment means that you can decompose it. So that's a little bit of a clue. And then we get to see the weapon. The weapon is really cool. In this deck tech, something that came up a few times was the inclusion of Stalagmite, and people talking about wanting to run a 2-handed weapon and Stalagmite being relegated to the sideboard and maybe not even being in the final list. With Summit, they just said that you're going to mainboard Stalagmite until the sun goes dark, right? So we get to have the best of both worlds. We get to play Stalagmite, and then in the end game, we also get the power of a 2-handed weapon that converts 2 blues into 6 damage, also with the potential to give a Frostbite, right? I think this card is fantastic. We could talk about, other weapon inclusions, but I think that this kind of hits everything that you want. You're able to play Stalagmite into aggro, and you're able to also play a 2-handed into silver mid-range matchups, while also getting 3 block out of the Stalagmite. And Stalagmite can find use into basically every single matchup that's not a Kano. Definitely fair to look at, and I probably would consider this to be the main weapon slot going forward. Another clue for deck building though, is the fact that this is a pull arm and is not a hammer, right? So you can't pummel this, which is incredibly relevant because pummel is actually a pretty good closing threat, not only for its ability to be played on attack action cards, but also to be able to play on your weapon. The fact that you can't play Pummel on your weapon is a pretty big downside, and I think it calls into question whether or not you should be playing Pummel anymore if we're going to be running this. And then to wrap it up, we have the rest of the equipment. Olin Ice Cap is pretty nuts in my opinion. I think it's an incredible headpiece. You are getting the effect of Stalagmite, which lets you use Stalagmite's effect essentially 3 times a game. The ability to give a Frostbite mid-turn during your opponent's offensive phase is much more incredible than playing a Frostbite in your own turn, because if you play Frostbite in your own turn, your opponent can make decisions based around that information, right? They know they have the Frostbite, so they're going to play accordingly. The potential that whenever they attack, if they're not, holding a hand that's able to play through the Frostbite, they may have to make different decisions before they even attack you because of the threat of stuff like Stalagmite. Ice Cap just lets you do that 3 times a game, and also Ice Cap can block with another Ice card, which also includes equipment, so you can stick Ice Cap and Stalagmite in front of something and then give them 2 Frostbites, right? Which can be absolutely game-breaking in certain matchups. We have Tectonic Crust, kind of interesting card. We'll talk about it some more, but it is an Earth card that synergizes with blocking with Earth cards. This is where things get pretty crazy. So maybe kind of surprising, the card that I think completely revolutionized how I view the deck is actually the Rootbound Trunks, a really innocuous 1 block. You know, it's not really a whole lot, but here's the deal. You were playing Civic Steps before. Civic Steps is a pretty bad card, and pretty much every Guardian player has wanted to cut it, right? When you look at all these equipments, they're all pretty awful, right? Crown of Prominence is good, Tunic is obviously really great. But everything here, like, you kind of want to cut, right? Like, we don't want to be playing Civic Steps, and Gauntlets of Iron Will is like borderline just vanilla block 3. Like, these aren't really fantastic equipments. I'm really happy with these. I think they're all very powerful, but Rootbound Trunk was super interesting to me because I thought, okay, I don't want to play Civic Steps. So how do I make this better than Civic Steps so I don't have to play Civic Steps, right? And so the answer is like, okay, I need auras so that I can block and turn it on, right? And then I thought, okay, if we block with an aura, that's automatically a non-attack, so the boots are worth 2, because you're getting an extra block that you wouldn't have there before. Here's the thing, I thought, okay, well, if I block with 2 non-attacks and the trunk, then we're getting 3 out of it, right? Which is perfect, right? Civic was worth 3, we're getting 3 value out of it, but we don't give our opponent 2 quicken tokens in the process. And so then, you know, we went a little bit further down the rabbit hole and thought, okay, well, if I need to make sure that I'm getting 3 value out of this, I probably need to run a lot of non-attacks. And then one other thought popped in my head, which was, oh my god, this is so easy to decompose, right? Like, you're gonna block as soon as you get your optimal value, and then you just have an Earth card chilling in your graveyard, right? Which is something that this deck did not have the privilege of doing. It's why we talked about Felling being in a maybe board, because if you wanted to play, you know, decompose cards, you had to stick them in your slots, right? We're looking at the, and of course, Frozen to Death is really cool. It's a really good utility blue. It's an ice card, blocks 3, non-attack, right? Well, with the trunks, blocks 4, and it just unconditionally has Mangle's effect, which is insane. You're going to be able to snipe so many equipments as early as turn 2 and just completely shut off things from your opponent that can potentially be game losing based on how much of their win con is based around their equipment. So if you play like this in a Florian and you kill Grasp immediately, they lose their entire endgame plan with Reaping Blade. Pretty nuts, right? But Trunks. So Trunks is how we got to today's list. Pretty cool, right? Now, here's the deal. You're looking at the chess piece, and the chess piece is Barkskin. And so we're gonna run down the logical, you know, process for how we ended up at Barkskin. If we're not playing Pummel, because you can't pummel the weapon, which is relevant, right? If we can't pummel Summit, I don't think we should be playing Pummel, to be honest. That's just where I am personally. The other thing too is that with the arm piece, you're never floating resources for Mangle. You either should be giving it Dominate or you should be giving it +2. If you're playing it with 2 floating and you had to pitch 2 like generic Guardian cards, something's probably gone wrong, and you probably should just wait for a different window to play it, unless if it was just really bad variance with how you drew the block card. So that's the thing, right? If we're not playing Pummel and we're not, you know, doing anything with Mangle, if Mangle is costing 6 now, we're not floating anything. What are we running Tunic for, right? Well, not really anything, right? And if we are thinking about playing Decompose because of Rootbound and the arm piece, these, you know, they cost 2 and 3. We don't need Tunic. There's nothing that Tunic facilitates in this deck right now. So where does that leave us? Well, now we don't need a chess piece that gives us resources. What's a chess piece that doesn't give us resources? That's also pretty above rate, and that's going to be Barkskin. New game plan. Somehow, this one stupid block 1 boot changed my entire build. I actually felt pretty confident that this original list was like pretty on the money. And I was like, yeah, you know, like maybe they give us something that like cares if you pitch an ice and an earth card, and like maybe we mess with the ratios a little bit. But I was like, I don't really think I'm gonna like overhaul it or anything like that, right? You know, like we're gonna play Rouse, we're gonna play Macho, we're gonna play T-Quake, you know, we're gonna go nuts, right? And then they drop this thing on me, and now all of a sudden here I'm playing Aura Guardian, right? So let's run through the rest of the deck here. The main game plan is you're gonna play the same style as before. You're playing mid-range numbers, you are playing good, efficient disruption, you are stalling your opponent's game plan, aggroing them down with good, efficient hits, right? Especially now that we have Felling and Plow, like you can just send these, and these are really good clocks to your opponent. You're using Stalagmite at optimal times to shut off your opponent's power turns. You're incentivized to block with Stalagmite pretty aggressively, especially because you still have access to the Ice Cap if you want to run it, but then your Summit is online in the end game, right? We're playing a lot more auras now. We're looking at things like Stamp Authority. You can play Stamp Authority going first. This deck has incredible equity going first. You can pitch into the arms just to have a second card and pitch for Stamp. You can do the same thing if you want to keep Channel Mount Eisen. or like Frigid around, synergizes really well at Summit, right? You can get 3 ice cards into pitch super easily. Like, these cards are sticking around in the end game. We're blocking with these auras and non-attacks that get max value out of the boots, which then means we can decompose with either Carapace, Felling, or Plow, which then means we get to turn on Barkskin afterwards and get extra additional value out of all of these different, 3-block non-attacks, or in the case of Winter's Bite, a 2-block non-attacks becomes a 3-block. And if you're ever given the window to, you can play Nerves of Steel into low to the ground aggro decks and just actually never let them play the game, because you'll be able to re-trigger Barkskin every single turn. You'll be able to reblock with Stalagmite every single turn. Like, it's going to be absolutely absurd if you get that card online. You shouldn't be playing it as a win condition. This is not a fatigue deck. This is just a deck that now has to run a bunch of auras in the blue slots that have good utility, right? So if you CLF lock your opponent and you like Stalag block or whatever, or you play Oakenold and they lose their entire hand and they pass back to you and you're holding 4 cards, with things like Imposing, you can at least like convert your hand pretty well and go get some decent utility auras on the field, right? If you don't have an attack in hand. But the rest of the deck is basically the same as it was before. We're still messing around with the ratio of Mangles to Unforgetting Unforgivings. The idea is that the block card, even though like rate of 4 on defense is okay, I want more copies of Mangle because of the arm piece. So I think I'd rather have more Mangles than I would have Unforgivings. And I don't think I need 3 and 3. That feels a little bit excessive. So that's where I'm at with this, right? So this is the main board. Like, we're playing basically a hybrid package, leaning a little bit into Decompose. These cards block 3, so you don't really care too much if you have to block with them. And then your end game is going to naturally just be a bunch of ice cards. You can put things like Glacial in your pitch stack pretty easily. I am considering cutting Cranial Crush for another 3-block non-attack, just to get more equity out of the boots and Barkskin, while also trying to make my new matchup better, because this deck is pretty close to being able to just have no, to make News Hero power basically have no relevancy. And if we go into our inventories, our sideboard, we're teching a little bit. We're basically stacking Kano and Verdance. They're not showing up enough in tournament stats to make me think that I need AB3. So we're on AB1 for the Rune Blades, and that's basically it. My plan, if I were to play this at a tier 3 event right now, is that I would hope that I would open up with Frozen to Death and Crumble incredibly quickly in a Kano, and then just try to get lucky, right? Stick a CLF so that they can't combo, and just hope that I can just like raw fuse Oakenolds or find a Plow Hunter to disrupt them enough to go off. And that's basically it. And the rest here is Summer's Fall. This can be good into the Rune Blades, right? Like, you're able to, dunk embodiments against Aurora. You can sync Malefics against Viscerai. You can play this into decks that create agility tokens. Like, we're talking really niche stuff here, but this is mainly for Enigma, right? This is trying to find an answer to Mirror Guide because this deck no longer has any Go Again. Part of the reason behind that is really around the weapons. So playing Rouse and showing a bunch of blues and a red or whatever, and then swinging Titan's Fist after is like pretty good, right? Because you're going 7 and then 4, which is like pretty nice to try to push a Mirror Guy off the table. But with this thing costing 6, like you're not playing Rouse, right? And especially if we're leaning into more non-attacks and auras with the trunks, like Rouse is just never happening. So we cut Rouse, which means that this deck is very soft to Enigma. However, same idea with like Kano, right? Like, I think that this deck becomes really powerful if you just lock in what you want to beat. I think Summer's Fall is enough for now to start messing around with the fact that we could maybe just like get there against Enigma with just being able to answer Mirror Guy when it comes down. So we're going to be testing this in the future. I would have liked to test this list before I put it out, but the cards aren't on Talishar, and I just wanted to get the theory rolling, because like looking at this, like it all makes sense. Like, it all clicks in my head. There's like maybe 2 cards looking right here that I'm a little bit skeptical on, mainly just like Cranial and Glacial, if this should just be all non-attacks. But like, man, this list, like, it executes what it wants so well. 2 Staunches. Main idea for Staunch and Arctic is you never want to draw 3 in a hand. 2 is reasonable because you can play one and arsenal the other, but 3 copies I think will just lose you the game pretty quickly. And you don't need them all that frequently. You have good disruption into aggro, and you only want to land a few of these into certain spots. But then we're on 3 Syncs, because Sync is just incredible. 3 Blizzards as well. Blizzard is fantastic. You could probably make a case that it could just go right up to the main board. There's almost like no matchup where you don't want to play this currently in the meta. It just is a really good utility card. So if you want to, find 3 slots really easily, just, swap Blizzard for maybe like one of these like 3-block attacks, right? Ups your ice ratio as well for things like Frozen to Death and your channels so that they can stick better. And then we can go down to the maybe board, talk about a few cards I didn't include today. Chokeslam is very interesting with Tectonic Crust. So the main idea here is I am curious about a build that could lean into Tectonic, specifically to play 4 costs and 7 costs. Normally you would want Tunic for a build like this, but the deal is Tectonic can just get it for you on demand. So if you don't expect the game to go that long, right, like the game would need to go 9 turns for Tunic to be worth more than Tectonic, which, you know, I mean, to be honest, in Jarl, I would expect it to. But if you don't think it's going to and you want to build a more aggressive plan, what you can do is you can run it with well-grounded and just stick the well-grounded because it's a 0 block, so it's a no block. You can block with this whenever you want. You can just put it with the Tectonic Crust in front of the same attack, right? You can block with both of these at the same time, trigger the Tectonic, make a Seismic whenever you want on demand, and that way you can destroy your 4 attacks like Chokeslam or a 7 power. You can even go up to 10 if you want to play Pulverize. I wanted to include that idea down here. I'm not playing it because I just don't see the power in it right now, but I think it's worth mentioning. The third copy of Unforgetting, I just don't really know what to do with it. Hypothermia is kind of interesting. This card was pretty insane, honestly. Even playing on your own turn, specifically with Dio. I'm making this deck tech before they do the BNR on Monday, so this may be kind of dumb, but my assumption is that Dio is getting hit in some capacity. You know, shout out to Sam Sutherland for figuring out the reset deck. Sorry, I only put 1 copy of Monocle in it. I didn't know how insane that card was going to be. But yeah, so I expect Dio to get hit in some capacity. So at this point, you're playing Hypo for Aurora, which, I mean, trust me, it's very good into Aurora. And you're playing it for Viserai, which is also very good into Viserai. But the deal is that those are the only heroes it's really good into. It is an Aura, so that does help with your boots, but right now we're trying a Winter's Bite in that slot instead. Winter's Bite is just efficient into more matchups. And even in something like Aurora, like if you give her a Frostbite and also force it a Ripper card, if you time it when they're not on Tunic, if they're playing Tunic in the matchup, it can be absolutely devastating. Like you're probably taking 2 cards from her, like IP2 essentially. So it's like close to like Hypothermia, to be honest. She'll get to play 3 cards, which, you know, that's not good. I would much rather play Hypo into her, but it's just that Winter's Bite covers more matchups currently, which I think is relevant for where we're at. Coronet Peak has come up in discussion a few times because your weapon costs 6, so you don't have an actual 1-card play. I don't think that Coronet Peak is still good. I think that any deck where you would want to Coronet Peak them, so you think like an aggro deck, right? Like something where taking a card from them is actively disrupting their damage output. Ice Cap gets you the same thing, right? If not more. So, you know, I view Ice Cap as better against the aggro decks. And I'm not going to play Coronet Peak into a mid-range deck where like they can't convert 4 cards anyway. Like, what, are you going to play this in the mirror and like, oh no, like I lose a card. I was going to play all 4 cards, definitely. It's a tough card to nail down. I honestly think that Crown is just like, if you're going to think about it, like you should just be playing Crown instead. So, but to quickly clarify my thoughts on Coronet Peak, the solution to 1-card hands not being playable is to just manage your cards a little bit cleaner, basically. The nice thing about this list, not needing, you know, Tunic or anything like that, like not playing 4 costs or 7 costs. Mangle is now an honorary 6 cost. It's not a 4 cost anymore. But, you know, these things, right? Like CNC, Felling, Oaken, Plow Hunter, these can all be played with 1 blue, right? So what you can do is if you're going to block down, like you have 4 cards in your hand and you're worried that, you know, your opponent's still attacking, you have to block, but you're like, oh, if they just pass an arsenal and I have 1 more card left in hand, I do nothing. Just save a threat, right? Save a threat, arsenal it, and then the next turn you can block down to 1 hand and play your Felling, play your Plow, play your CNC. You know, you don't have to worry too much about the 1-card hands, in my opinion. I think you're able to navigate with your deck very cleanly around it. You also have some decent 1-card plays, right? Like you can play Crumble, you can play Winter's Bite. You know, I don't think it's entirely, you know, hopeless for you, right? If your opponent passes and leaves you with 1 card, it just comes down to your blocking decisions and how you're managing your arsenal, right? So with that in mind, you know, if you want a 2-block headpiece, I think Crown is so much better. I actually would like to find room for Crown back in the list at some point, but you know, like Ice Cap is just good into everything, right? Like, you know, you can play this in the mirror and like, if you're worried that they're playing Pummels or, you know, any other Guardian where they could be playing Pummels, like you can just negate every single time they're trying to efficiently Tunic Pummel you, like for all 3 Pummels, right? Because first 2 you're blocking with Stalag, and the third one you're blocking with the Ice Cap, right? So the only solution to pummel you at that point is if they eat you know, 3 more damage to keep an extra card to pitch, and at that point, like, you're winning. But yeah, so Crown is definitely, you know, that's a card I would like to include back in at some point. Very good. But yeah, that's the overall list for today. So to recap, the point of this deck is playing efficient mid-range, where you are attacking your opponent to drop their life total to 0. This is not like a CYB fatigue list. Like, even though it's playing Nerves and Barkskin and Stalag, your end game is to kill them, right? So you're playing good threats, playing good numbers. You are controlling the pace of the game the entire time. The equipments are very strong. You are using Trunks along with a bunch of non-attacks to get max value out of them. Like, the highest that this thing can go if you're holding 4 non-attacks is this card blocks for 5, which is pretty crazy. It's not going to get there most of the time. But you're blocking with Trunks. You're trying to cash in your gauntlets for value and then blocking with them as well. This lets you decompose really easily, so that way you're able to turn on Barkskin. You block with your Barkskin and some non-attacks, get max value out of your chest piece since you're not using Tunic for anything in this list. And then once Barkskin's gone, you can decompose it again. And then your end game is going to be, you know, things like CLF, Channel Mount Eisen. You're, you know, playing Channel Mount Eisen, you're swinging your Summit. Just really powerful stuff. Early game, you're trying to force your opponent into blocking with equipment. You're going to try to bait them, right? Because they're going to have to cash in their equipment at some point and turn on your hero power. But if they're not, and if you also want to high roll very early, you can play things like Crumble into Frozen. And if you're ever given extra cards on your turn, you have good rate auras that you can play. This deck really likes to go first. And that's the overall game plan for it. So I hope this is helpful in getting you kickstarted on the deck. Thinking about it a little bit more. Obviously, if you want to play something like a Tunic list, you can just, you know, view this tab on the deck list and, you know, reference this if this is more the style that you think the deck should go in. But this is just really interesting. The idea of playing Barkskin and no Tunic in a Guardian list is really intriguing. So I really wanted to put this out there as quickly as possible because, like, I'm just looking at it and it just seems like it works. But, you know, obviously time will tell. But until next time, thank you for watching.